First up, though, let's talk about, well, we have to talk about BBC and these BBC stars getting pay rises. What about King Charles? He's set for a huge £45 million pay rise with an increase of more than 50% in his official annual income. Let's talk about this with Norma Baker. He's author of And What Do You Do? What the Royal Family Don't Want You to Know. All about royal finances. Good afternoon to you. Norman, are you there?
Hello, Julia.
Oh, we've got you there.
Nice to speak to you.
Lovely to speak to you. Look, I mean, we've talked about and written about royal finances for a very long time. I mean, there's lots I want to ask you about. First of all, how on earth is King Charles getting a £45 million pay rise?
Well, he's getting it because of a ridiculous arrangement made by George Osborne in 2011, which replaced the money arrangements that had been in place for 250 years, the civil list, with something called the Soaring grant, which linked directly to the income from the Crown Estate. The Crown Estate, despite its name, has been in the public arena, the public purse, since 1760, when George III surrendered it. But the consequence of that is 25% of that now comes to the royal family. So the expansion of wind farms on the seabed and other assets which have nothing to do with the royal family is now generating a huge amount of money for Charles, which should actually be going to the Treasury. You know, let's bear in mind that in 2011, the civil list for the royal family was 7.9 million. 7.9 million in 2011. It's now over 100 million, hugely above inflation.
I was going to say inflation's been bad, but it's not been that bad. But just go back to the Crown Estate again. So the Crown Estate, it's owned by the state. It's not owned by the King personally. But he and the Queen previously would get 25% of the income.
Yes.
But I found this when I saw this morning. I was absolutely astonished to discover the Crown Estate basically owns the sort of the seabed around the country. And so when the seabed is basically rented out effectively for these wind farms. The Crown Estate gets the benefit, which you would think would be the state, but the King gets a quarter of that. I mean, I think a lot of people, even people who are staunch monarchists, big fans of the previous monarch, the Queen, and big fans of King Charles, will go, well, hold on a minute, you haven't done anything to... it's not your clever entrepreneurial skills. I mean, he's working with the Duchy of Cornwall with selling his treacle tarts and his ice cream and things is one thing, but this he's not done anything for. This has got nothing to do with him, and yet he gets a massive bumper pay rise. What does that money get spent on?
Well, I mean, whatever he wants, or he pockets it, to be perfectly honest with you. But I'm afraid this is not about whether you have a royal family or not, because it's a separate discussion. But if you look at the cost of the British royal family compared to any other royal family in Europe, it's massively more. Some royal families in Europe cost less than £10 million a year. Ours costs, taking security as well, probably going up for £500 million a year now. It's absurd. And I'm afraid the attitude of Charles and the palace officials who serve them is to maximise the amount of money they can take from the public purse. Let's look at Buckingham Palace. 370 million has been spent on refurbishing that in a kind of all bells and whistles system. Although the original estimate was less than 50 million. But now Charles is charging £75 a head for people to look round it. And the money from that is not going back to the Treasury to offset the 370 million. It's going into his pocket. That's.
I remember when Windsor Castle had the fire, and obviously I think the Prime Minister then, John Major, announced, of course, the state will, the taxpayers will pay for it to be refurbished, and the taxpayers went, no, we won't. We're not happy about that at all. Now that was the first time people went, hold on a minute. But again, if Buckingham Palace is being refurbished, look, it's whether we have a head of state in the King where they live. The royal events, major state ceremonies take there. It needs to be in good nick, but. We shouldn't, the taxpayers who pay for it shouldn't be expected to be charged extra by the guy who lives in it to go and look at it.
No, exactly so. But I'm afraid that's exactly what is happening at the moment.
Yeah.
Every opportunity to get money from the public purse is being taken. It's an absolute disgrace, and Charles should be frankly ashamed of himself. And I speak to the Privy Councillor, who's my official role, to advise the King. I'm advising him now to give some of that money back to the taxpayer.
I have to say, I also thought it was interesting on the eco-friendly thing that something King Charles talks an awful lot about, attends, those summits and that he's installing solar panels at Windsor Castle, converting the state Bentleys to run on biofuel. Again, these will be huge costs. Getting rid of sort of gas lights and replacing them with other lights. But also, they're going to buy 2 brand new helicopters. I'm not quite sure how this tallies.
Well, it works this way, that Charles has committed to improve the environment, but he's committed to everybody else taking action to improve it. When it comes to himself, he doesn't follow his own rules. That's why they're using helicopters, that's why they're using private jets, and why the cost of road travel has increased markedly last year in terms of cost, although the number of journeys has actually gone down.
Yeah, that's quite telling, isn't it? I mean, everyone has a go at ministers using them, but at least they actually need to be doing that for business. Although Labour said they wouldn't, and now, of course, they are. What a surprise. Norman Baker, pleasure to speak to you. Thank you. Author of What Do You Do? What the Royal Family Don't Want You to Know, particularly about their finances. Benedict Spence, just a brief word.
I mean, on the subject of helicopters, people should know helicopters are actually very dangerous if they're not kept up to date. I know this because I'm related to somebody who is an expert on aviation law. You'd be surprised at the number of accidents that happen.
These small planes and
they are really dangerous.
Seems to be how rich people die generally.
It does,
as a general
and you need to keep them up to date and serviced.
So when I do get my helicopter, I'm going to keep it up to date.
Don't get a second-hand one.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.